So welcome once again to our continuing formation for novices in the North American Preceptory. We're going over part 2 today, and we're going to focus extensively on chapter 4. In the last chapter, I felt it necessary that we could go over that line by line, but today I'm hoping there'll be quite a few questions perhaps uh, on that. By the way, if you grab that book right there, once you get two of those, the Templars, out. See in the bottom shelf, there's 2 copies. Yeah, grab that. Okay. And if you Google, to everybody following along here, I'm just going to put this right here in the chat real quick here on the live event. If you want to follow along for asking any type of questions, there you go. That's the first 5 chapters. You're going to need the book for the other 15 chapters, but this is a very important. This is a very important chapter because it actually goes over what the lifestyle of the knights were. Now, in this book, I think it's page. It's in the index. It's page 215, each one of you, and you want to go to chapter 4 on page 215. Now, it's very important that when we read this, because we're actually going to be looking at the practical aspects of the knighthood, and that this is our spirit, this is what we wrote our constitutions and our rules to imitate, was the lifestyle of one of the ancient Knights Templar. That what we're doing here is we're trying to get to heaven, okay? So first and foremost, we're not trying to be Knights Templars for the sake of being Knights Templars. We're trying to get to heaven. And so there are certain things that, no matter what, we always share in common with all the members of the faithful of the church. So we're not going to dwell on the things that we share in common. Rather, we're going to dwell on those excellences that manifested themselves in a particular way in the Knights Templar. It's not that other orders or other groups do not have or share in these excellences, but the Knights Templar manifested these excellences in a particular way. This isn't complicated to understand. The Franciscans manifest poverty, or at least that was the way they were. The Dominicans, it was learning and preaching, specifically preaching after laymen in the streets, even if that's what it took to do it. The Templars defended the church. But they pursued that. All laymen, of course, defend the church in a sense, but they pursued that in a particular way. Next thing to remember is that, as St. Bernard said, the true measure of loving God is to love him without measure. Even if we were to reach in our spiritual lives the point where we perfectly obeyed the letter and the spirit of our rules and our constitutions, which, of course, actually have admonitions in them to love God without measure. But let's say we were able to perfectly keep them. That is not the end in and of itself. We don't get to go, okay, now that I perfectly keep the rule, now that I perfectly keep the constitutions, my work is done, or now that I may rest. That is not the case at all. Rather, at that point, in the rule of St. Benedict, at the end of the book, he makes this observation. He says, basically, these rules can be kept by anybody, and you need to get beyond this. When Christ rebuked the Pharisees, he didn't say, he said to the faithful, he goes, you must exceed them, right? You have to obey the law, the letter, and the spirit, not just the letter of the law. So we never want to read chapter 4 and 5 here, or a rule, in a limited way. This is not the limit of perfection. This is a way of life oriented towards perfection, but perfection lies even beyond this. Now, one of the problems that exists today, in my opinion, in the church, is that third orders and lay associations do not have much of a flavor because they don't distinguish themselves from lay group to lay group. I will give you the template. They will say, okay, you're going to meet once a month, normally with a priest of the order you're in a group with. They will then go over some spiritual topic concerning their group. They will ask the layman to do very little. It's normally morning and evening prayer out of either the little office, the liturgy of the hours, or they ask them to say a rosary and to include the institute that they're attached to in those prayers. They don't ask more than that. Laymen aren't told to go out and do a bunch of works. And the result of this is that they almost appear to be the same thing. The only difference is maybe the Dominicans read the life of St. Dominic and St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Carmelites read St. Teresa of Avila's biography, The Way of Perfection, or St. John of the Cross's, Dark Night of the Soul. And so there's very little difference in terms of flavor. I mean, it's akin to, like, you can have any light beer you want. I mean, and they are different, but not by much. And so I hope that one of the things that has drawn you to the Knights is there is a desire to have a distinct flavor, because if the whole church lacks something in it, we're a body. If one part of the body is missing, it doesn't function well. And there are only so many spaces for just the same hairs on our head that are just slightly different, but nevertheless cover the scalp. So when we read chapter 4 and 5, we need to keep in mind that St. Bernard's admonitions some of them can be observed by all Catholics, period. Some are particular to a time and place, and we should seek what we can and profit by them, but we shouldn't worry about keeping that letter, because the circumstance he's talking about existed only one time at one place, and we may not be in that time and place during our lifetime. It's important to remember that the Templars lasted over 200 years. Imagine the difference that exists between me telling you your duties as an American, as a colonial American, versus the duties of an American in the Western period, the Western expansion, versus the duty of an American during the Great Depression, or the duty of an American today. It's just very different. Some outline our particular way of life. It must be closely fostered within ourselves. And then lastly, and this is the one which I want you to follow along with the text to some degree, to ask me about these if I don't cover them. Some actually appear to come into conflict with our rule or our current constitutions. So let's go ahead and keep started, and we're going to talk about some of these. I am, of course, skipping over many of the things. In the first place, discipline is in no way lacking in obedience, is never despised. As Scripture testifies, the undisciplined son shall perish, and rebellion is the sin of witchcraft. To refuse obedience is like the crime of idolatry. Therefore, they come and go at the bidding of their superior. They wear what he gives them. They do not presume to wear or eat anything from another source. Thus they shun every excess in clothing and food, and content themselves with what is necessary. They live as brothers in joyful and sober company, without wives or children, so that their evangelical perfection will lack nothing. They dwell united in one family with no personal property whatever, Careful to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace, you may say that the whole multitude has but one heart and one soul, to the point that nobody follows his own will, but rather seeks to follow the commander. Okay. Obviously, obedience in this order is a real and tangible thing. If you mess up in it, we correct you. If you mess up too many times, you have to leave. You actually are asked to do something. It's not something done out of custom. It is something that you will be tested on occasionally as a novice. And as a knight, you will be ordered to do things in obedience. My wife is obedient to me. But our bond is such that if I ask her to do something, I don't have to invoke obedience. Such, like St. Bernard says, they are like, he says, they dwell united as one family. And that is the way that we should look at one another, as a family. We can't let our term brother be an empty, meaningless archaism alluding to something we want to be. We have to mean it. We have to really love one another and to remember that in a way, I love you both more than I do my own sister. Why? Because I have freely chosen this association with you, and that we push towards a common end that unites us. My sister lives in Washington State. We were raised together. I love her out of an affection, but I don't deal with her frequently. And we push towards a common end too. She's a Catholic woman, devout woman. But I don't work with her. I work, I live, I dwell with you. Now, once again, we identified here certain things that were particular to a time and place. We do not live in common. So there's not going to be the ability to have me feed you every night, or we're not going to assign a cook or anything like that. But we do living things together in common. We eat together. We spend time in one another's homes. And we can still approach these things with that spirit where we joyfully accept the things that our superiors give us. Or if we're superior, we joyfully accept those acts of kindness that other people give us, correct? And that we seek to dwell in that unity of perfection. Now, it also points out here that they shun every excess in clothing and food and content themselves with what is necessary. This is one of those areas where I said, some outline our particular way of life and must be closely fostered within ourselves. This is far more obtainable for the man who is not married than it is for the man that is married. You two are not married yet. So at this time, you need to do your best when you examine what you own and what you purchase and what you spend your time with, if these things are excessive or if they are not. Here's a rule of thumb that I find helpful. If it is common, it's probably okay. If it's uncommon, it has to be examined. Doesn't mean you're not allowed to have it, just means it needs to be examined. For example, it's common for men to own a gun for self-defense. It's not even necessarily in America an unusual thing for a man to own more than one gun. It might be a little excessive if you wanted to buy a $3,000 tournament rifle and you didn't shoot regularly. That's an extreme example. I'll give you another good one. It's common for men to drink beer. It's common for men to drink alcohol of all types. Lots of people of modest incomes have a drink now and then, and the knights historically drank alcohol. It's not so good if you're drinking $40, $50 bottles, even if you can afford them. Why? Because it's uncommon and it can be viewed as an excess. Okay? So that is one of the things that we must foster within ourselves, is this spirit of examining things as, are we taking this as something that is necessary, or is this an excess? And this answer obviously exists on a spectrum. And I think we can find some good guidance from the rule of St. Augustine. I've alluded to this before, that you should not, from the moment you enter the Knights, try to improve your lot in life greatly. It would be sad to see a person commit themselves to traveling the way of the cross, and they're actually making their standard of living more comfortable. That doesn't mean you won't need a big vehicle if you have 7 children. It doesn't mean that you're not going to eat meat ever again or something like that. But we should look at our childhoods, look at the way we've lived our lives in these last few years, and barring we've been living some type of odd penury that's a result of misfortune, we shouldn't be seeking to continue to grow in our wealth and standing in the world. That it's not the spirit of the knighthood, that it's not the spirit of the Templar. Let's keep going. They never sit in idleness or wander about aimlessly, but on the rare occasions when they are not on duty, they are always careful to earn their bread by repairing their worn armor and torn clothing, or simply by setting things in order. For the rest, they are guided by the common needs and by the orders of their master. Once again, worn armor, torn clothing, that was for that time and place. Unless you were deployed in the field today, you're probably not going to be dealing with that. Right? However, setting things in order. We are men of order in our lives. First work, then play. Prep for tomorrow. Doesn't mean you have to prep for, have an underground bunker or something like that, but you prep your days for tomorrow. You pay your bills on time, right? You remain a respectable person who has his life in order. Now, it also says here, there is very rare that they are not on duty. One of the reasons why we make you have a prayer rule is because most of us in this preceptory work full time. By the time you're done working 40 hours, doing your duties as either taking care of yourself or your family, and living a life of prayer and work, there is very little free time left. And then it says, for rest they are guided by the common needs and by the order of their master. Well, this is very simple. Your common needs are going to really be defined by what type of attentions and affections your family is going to make in a demand of you. And also in terms of the orders of their master. This can be alluded to the fact that, once again, we see each other as a family who likes to spend time with one another. I don't believe it's in our constitutions. In one of our binding documents on growth and criteria growth, it does mention that the individual commanderies and preceptories are supposed to organize times where they can just come together as families and be together. Right? Okay. There is no distinction of persons among them, and deference is shown to merit rather than to noble blood. They rival one another in mutual consideration, and they carry one another's burdens, thus fulfilling the law of Christ. No inappropriate word, idle deed, unrestrained laugh, pause. It's very important to remember this. The monastics hated unrestrained laugh. Unrestrained laugh means not that you're not allowed to laugh. You're not allowed to fall on the ground like an idiot or stop controlling yourselves. You'll know it. I mean, we've all probably given unrestrained laughter. That's one. And the other one of those people who can't stop telling jokes. I experienced this today. Somebody said something very warm and affectionate, and somebody had to crack a little remark at the end of it, as the American manly custom of not being able to enjoy a kind moment or a kind remark without adding a joke onto the end of it. Okay? Don't be that guy. It's unbecoming. It's not Christian. We don't. Acts of reverence should not make us uncomfortable. We're not up there during liturgy cracking jokes when we're speaking love things to God. Your wife certainly wouldn't appreciate it if, she was saying something affectionate to you, and then you come back with a little lighthearted wittyism. It's a serious character fault. Don't. So remember that the Knights Templar were described by many contemporaries as like stone-faced killers. Okay, be more like that. If you have to pick an extreme, aim on the solemn side. Ideally, you'll be balanced, but don't be the buffoon. Let's continue. Not even the slightest whisper or murmur is left uncorrected. Okay, once again, a pause. Remember that monasticism, there were periods of enforced silence from Compline to the first prayers. You weren't allowed to speak. That's called the Great Silence, and it's been around since, like the post-apostolic period. It's been around for a very long time. They were allowed to speak, and of course, monastic observance on silence varied greatly. And I don't know in my own reading of the Templars how strict they were of keeping it. They were Cistercian reformers, but Cistercians did speak, and that's why we got the Trappist reformers, because the Trappists basically took what the Cistercians were doing and added extreme silence to it. So anyway, let's keep going. They forswear dice and chess and abhor the chase. They take no delight in the ridiculous cruelty of falconry, as is the custom. As for jesters, magicians, bards, troubadours, and jousters, they despise and reject them as so many vanities and unsound deceptions. Their hair is worn short, in conformity with the apostle's saying that it is shameful for a man to cultivate flowing locks. Indeed, they seldom wash and never set their hair, content to appear tousled and dusty, bearing the marks of the sun and of their armor. Okay, so a few remarks here. As you will learn from studying the history of the Templars throughout your life, it is unfortunate that here he is speaking to the ancient founders of the Templars and not to the men that would come after them. We know the Templars played chess and gambled. Like, that's a recorded fact of history. So, but what can we say this? Are you allowed, for example, to ever play a board game the rest of your life as a Templar? Yes, you are. In our rule and constitutions, it does not have any enforcement of that. What is important here to bear in mind is say they forswear dice and chess and abhor the chase. And they, as for just magicians, bards, troubadours, and justice, they despise and reject them as vanities and unsound deceptions. You must look at this life that we share in common together here is not one of pleasure seeking. We do not come together as Templars to have land tournaments, LARP, drinking contests, go to shows, whether they're high culture, classical music concerts, or low culture rock and roll. That's not what this is about. And I think that is, and if anybody says, well, you're not being strict enough, you're right. But at the end of every religious perfection, in the end of the day, is there somewhat of a rejection of worldly things? Because what happens to the soul as you live in conformity with the scriptures, with your office, with the frequenting of the sacraments, is your own soul will stop taking the delight in those worldly things that it once did, and it will be followed on eventually by a hatred of them. Why? Because your soul will long to be with Christ, and it realizes that these things are distractions. We're all meat eaters here. What do I mean? We don't have to get up there on Sunday and worry about speaking to the lowest common denominator in the church and offending him. We ask people to make heroic sacrifices. We're all meat eaters. I don't know if whatever you do. I mean, if you're playing video games right now or doing it, don't sweat it, okay? You're not perfect yet. But that shouldn't trouble you, in a sense. I mean, I don't wake up in the morning sad because I'm not the most handsome man in the world, or the most intelligent, or the most devout. What is important is that you are on the road of conversion. You're traveling, you're conforming to Christ. Now, as the imitation of Christ says, of course, the greater your resolutions are, and the more violence you do to yourself in the beginning, you will have much peace later. So if you want to, and your spiritual director blesses it, to radically cut things out of your life and pursue strict silence, strict abandonment of worldly entertainment, strictness, and your wife doesn't say no to anything, it's not, of course, sinful. You, of course, have the freedom to do so. But this is this is when you're looking at what you should cut out of your life, he's not talking about their extreme fasting here, is he? He's talking about their withdrawal from personal amusements. And maybe that's where a Templar should look first when he's going, I wish to be more ascetical. I wish to embrace the cross. Maybe that's where he should look first. But this society is not about pleasure taking together. Although it is allowed, and on occasion it is good. But that's not what it's about. And when you consider how many male societies are about getting together and shooting pool and drinking beer or watching, doing video game or whatever, that's actually an important thing to always keep in our mind. Okay. And as far as the hair, okay, so this is one area where it comes into direct conflict with the rule that we observe. He says that they seldom wash and never set their hair. If you don't wash, comb your hair or whatever, and you look like a bum, it's going to reflect badly on us. Our rule demands that you obey the social conventions of the day. All right? But but once again, though, there's a way to obey the spirit. The spirit of that is that they weren't worried about their looks. They were worried about getting in and fighting hard or living hard. And they let their hair rest where it rests. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen me. I have kind of out of control hair that I can barely I cut it. It's a home cut too, to boot. But I'm not constantly in a mirror every day combing my hair. Comb my hair in the morning, comb my hair before important things, and I let it rest where it may. And by the way, that is an important thing because you don't want, I mean, my goodness, don't be a Templar and pretend you're a Templar if you're styling your hair with gel and spending tons of money getting it cut. That sounds like you shouldn't have to say that, but we do today. Why? Because we have a different form. I mean, he's complaining about them running around in vain armor. All right, well, I'll give you the picture of so-called manliness in at least parts of the world, right? You're wearing your very tight cut, checkered shirt, rolled up to your sleeves, of course, to show off your tribal tattoo, right? With your long beard that you've gone into a barber that's put beard oil on it and stuff, and they give you a fancy haircut so you can show off your, earrings on the side of it so you can look real badass.
Sorry, gauges?
Gauges, I'm sorry.
Sorry,
That's
thank you. Cracking jokes you just mentioned, but anyway.
No, that's fine. By the way, the canons were very helpful to me in finding the right balance on you. If you ever need help, they are always they're familiar with our rule, Don Daniel and
yeah.
They're very helpful because they're monastics and they can help you find the balance. Okay. And by the way, you have to listen to your conscience on a lot of this. You have to listen to your heart to some degree. God calls some people to a higher perfection. And it's not going to offend me. The one area you have to be careful on, and we have to be gentle with one another, is that people are different places. And we set a minimum standard for behavior. But what you do in your free time in your own home, unless you make it a public issue, I'm not going to ask about it. Let me rephrase that. As a novice, I probably will, within limits. But once you're a professed knight, no one's calling me up and checking on me. I check on the other knights occasionally on certain exterior observances, like do they have a spiritual director? But I don't ask them, well, in the evenings, are you watching TV? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you've been doing this TV thing now for 5 years. I mean, why haven't we given this emphasis? I don't do that. That's not going to, barring we start living together in common either, that's not a discussion we're going to start having. Now, if a knight and knights have called me up and talked to me about something like watching TV and wanted to discuss whether or not they should stop doing it, I am happy, either as a superior or just a friend, to explore that with them about maybe putting things away or choosing something better. But we're not some type of inquisition on one another. We, as this says, right, we bear one another's burdens. We encourage one another, right? Okay. When the battle is at hand, okay, I'm going to skip over some of this and just, once again, the idea, okay, here it is. They set their minds on fighting to win rather than on parading for show. They think not of glory and seek to be formidable rather than flamboyant. At the same time, they are not quarrelsome, rash, unduly hasty, but soberly, prudent, and providentially drawn up into orderly ranks, as we read of the fathers. We always play to win. In this church, now and forever ago, you do not play to win by advertising every single good work you do, getting permission to do every good work that you want to do. Just remember, canon law has given us a ton of rights, and you have a ton of rights as a Christian. I don't have to ask permission to the bishop to try to bring people to church, to relieve the poor, to do good works, to record audiobooks, to get people to sign, petitions against gay marriage or whatever. If I don't need it, I don't ask for it. I don't run around to diocese events trying to be noticed, and neither should you. It goes against our motto. Now, we're not secretive. I mean, we put our rule and constitutions up on the internet. This novice formation, anybody could be watching it right now. We're not a cult. We try to do as we've been admonished as Christians to do. On the one hand, to not let the left hand know what the right hand does, and on the other hand, to let our light shine before men. So we don't try to hide because we're ashamed. Rather, we're focused on playing to win. People forget that this church was built up one person at a time when the apostles were there. You see that in the Acts of the Apostles. And same thing with the knights. We build up this brotherhood. We do our work for society one person at a time oftentimes. It's not the goal of this institution to create new, aimless, and stupid bureaucracies that think that they're solving a problem, when in reality, it's creating an institution that oftentimes support a problem and keep it alive. So we play to win. That means being prudent. That means not doing stupid and rash things. Like, for example, I don't write letters to publish them on the internet attacking bishops and popes. It's not my place. We have to remember that we're not St. Athanasius. We are not a patriarch or a bishop or even a priest. No one asked us our opinion on these things. Our job is to see the faith, and specifically this way of life, passed on and enduring and growing. The Pope or a bishop, he can't come into my house and force me to seat adulterers at my table. These people can't force me to be nice. They can't come in here and rip my bravery out of my hands, burn my Dewey Rames Bible. They don't even have that power anymore. They can't stop us from wearing our habits when we're a duly elected order. That's the way that's playing to win. Just like if a pastor asks you to take off your habit and he misunderstands, just do it. Play to win. Long game. You call me, we'll get it all sorted out. it's going to end in you getting to where you're at. It always does. But you may have to take it off for a week. Play to win. Don't lose your patience. You're going to get beat up. It just comes with the territory. It's okay. Play to win. We don't sin to win. We have faith. We do things where we were supposed to. But we play to win. I'm never going to be one of those guys who tortures his language to figure out a way to like pretend like there isn't massive problems in both the church and society today. Play to win. I don't start off if I'm having a discussion with somebody trying to bring them into the church by, hitting them up with the need for severe penitence for public sinners or something like that. You start with, was Jesus Christ, our Lord, a historic person? And did he raise himself from the dead? That's where you start. Play to win. This is critical to Templar spirituality. In fact, whenever we propose things amongst ourselves, that should always be a question. Well, I don't know. Are we playing to win here? What's the long game? The long game is that we endure, we grow, and we're successful. You want to know what the pro-life movement, which more or less had a major victory this week, you know what their major success was, though? I'll tell you what it is. Anybody want to venture a guess? In this country, even our worst bishops don't even dare defend abortion from the pulpits. That can't be said in other countries. That can't be said in Europe. That can't even be said at the Vatican. But no bishop in this country today would dare defend abortion from the pulpit or hint at it. Even the worst bishops, all due in effect to the pro-life movement and the 40 Days for Life. I'm not kidding. The worst ones. They may try to tie it up with immigration, but you notice they have to actually phrase things to get their agenda across in pro-life terms. That was the success of the pro-life movement. It wasn't changing the country, ironically. It was protecting the church. If we do our job right in this country, no bishop would dare be against the things the Knights are against, or be kowtowing endlessly to feminism and womanism at the expense of men. They wouldn't dare giving certain weaknesses. They'd be afraid that there'd be a reaction of the male faithful, that they weren't defending the church hard enough on everything. And that's one of the reasons why we have to always maintain a good relationship with the Knights of Columbus, the Knights of Malta, all those other groups, because they, in a sense, are our brothers in arms. If all of us looked at our priest and bishop and demanded strength, or else they'd have to do the same thing. They would. That's playing to win. All right, let's keep going. I'm getting carried away. Okay, I'm going to skip over this because it's so obvious. He's talking about, right, and once he's in the thick of battle, do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? Am I not disgusted with your enemies? And that he attacks his enemies violently, no matter how outnumbered he is, he keeps fighting. He never puts his faith in his own strength, but he looks to God to give him victory. I mean, this is it. I mean, we should never, there's a few things that this go. One, we will never adjust our message to shoot the multitudes, ever. Either our way of life or our Catholic faith. And we never look to, one of the reasons why the world is so obsessed with optics is because they have no faith. You hear this all the time. Oh, if traditional Catholics were just nicer, we'd be invited into more places. Right? More people would come to our churches if we were just nice. Optics, optics, optics. At the expense of truth. Oh, I mean, my goodness, one thing I hate about the pro-life movement is that every time a homosexual or an atheist wants to be pro-life too, they they fought all over themselves for him. Going, oh look, we reached more than just Catholics. Give me a break. Okay, it's the same thing here. No matter how outnumbered we are, we stay true and we look to God. God's on our side. Believe it. God's on our side. Think about how he's brought you here through providence. God wants this. You literally have nothing to be afraid of as long as you think God is on your side. I mean, he actually is. God is on your side. That's how we approach our problems. Not wringing your hands and concerned about optics. My goodness, even if you screw up, even if you have like a mental meltdown or something, pick yourself up and move on with it. On numerous occasions, they have seen one man pursue 1,000, two put 10,000 to flight. This is true. Look at the number of times in history with martyrs where one man refuses to offer incense, all of a sudden, the whole world stops. It can't stand it. The whole world stops. Thus, in a wondrous and unique manner, they appear gentler than lambs, yet fiercer than lions. All right, that's your aspiration for the exterior look. We don't run around with tribal tattoos trying to look tough. Rather, we should be viewed as actually the most approachable men on earth, gentle as lambs. And on the other hand, once we set our mind to winning whatever it is we're pursuing, we're as tenacious as a lion. We don't give up. One of the rules of chivalry: you will persevere to the end in whatever you set out to do. You will persevere to the end. I do not know if it would be more appropriate to refer to them as monks or as soldiers, unless perhaps it would be better to recognize them as both. That is how you should view yourself. You're not a monk, technically. You're not a soldier, technically. You're both. That is your mentality. I am both a monk and a soldier. I live my life on the battlefield. I stop to say my office. I am willing to die right now. Indeed, they neither lack monastic neatness nor military might. What can we say this except that this has been done by the Lord and is marvelous in our eyes? Okay. And then he ends by saying, the valiant men of Israel chosen to guard well and faithfully the tomb, which is the bed of the true Solomon, each man sword in his hand and superbly trained for war. I'm going to actually pause it there because we've already gone quite a while. And I'm going to go ahead now and I want to just go real quick over the spirit again in the law. We should always be looking to offer our best to God without measure. We shouldn't ever go, I have labored all day in the heat, and now I am tired, so I will not say my office, or I will not do the best job I can for it. That's when God's grace is actually closest. That's when the real reward is. And the spirit that runs through our order, even if we can't keep a technical law like living in common or not having wives or children, there's still a way that we can try to live that out as the best we can. Because everything goes back to charity. Everything can, like, then the growth of charity and love of God in our hearts. So when we can't observe a law in particular, we do the best we can to get close to it. If you can't sing church, sing your office in church, and sing it at home. If you can't say your office, or you can't sing because of whatever reason, say it out loud. If you are in the evening and you can't do the reading that you wanted to do, read one chapter of the gospel. That's the spirit, is to pursue God. Now, the funny thing about it is the Spirit eventually will get you to the point, I hope, I pray, that takes you beyond these things. Now, you might ask, well, then how do I know? How do I know when I need rest that I'm not just being weak and afraid, cowardly? That's why you have a spiritual director. That's why you have a novice master. Because they help you know if you're giving all to God or if you're keeping things back that you shouldn't. That's why most people go out to spiritual life in a methodic way of working on one vice at a time, withdrawing from one area of their life at a time and replacing with something good. St. Philip Neri taught that we were to proceed with changing our life from a good one to a better one with caution. Because you can do too much. You can overwhelm yourself. And you already have the right spirit when loving obedience, you submit yourself to the director or your superior and you have him help guide you. Because the heart is there to give all to God. You just need somebody to help you figure out that. And there's also times where it benefits us more to rest or to eat more or to drink more for whatever reason. I went through a few periods in my life where the director I had at the time, he had me actually take time off. Another time, a director, because I was going through a particular burdensome time with some personal matters that were beyond my control, he mitigated my certain private observances. Because he thought that I needed to do that in order to keep my head above water. I didn't ask, he just told me to. That's why having a real relationship with your superior and your director is so important. That's why it needs to be more than just a once a year thing. It needs to be a monthly thing. We should feel, if we feel a strength in us that we're not using, we should push ourselves on. But we push ourselves on in the way of the Templars. We look to what we can imitate most perfectly there first, because that's where an abundance of grace is for you. Okay, I'll open it up now to questions. Let me get over here to the channel. Do we have any questions from the peanut gallery? And then also I have the in common folk.
Are you doing one first and then the other, or?
Well, there's always a 20-second delay, so why don't you guys go, and I'll keep an eye on what they.
At one point you mentioned that at a certain point we shouldn't keep seeking like work comforts in life. It was back when you're on that topic, and I want to clarify, like, just because you're not looking for more comforts or like more money for like your job and things like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should be just complacent in your life or in your work. I mean, like, I guess you could, but you're not. Are you saying that you shouldn't? Let's say for me to like advance my career and eventually like make more money.
No, there's a difference because you can make more money and use it to the right ends.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're interested, you have a serious romantic relationship, children are expensive, like wanting to advance in your career for your family to provide well for them is a virtuous thing. But there's a big difference between wanting to provide well for your family or maybe even helping your children to establish them in life and wanting to buy a boat.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's where you need to look into. Just like if you marry a rich woman, she may have certain expectations of a level of social life that you need to work together with her to come into a balance. But it would be tolerable to like allow that night to engage in those things. But it's not so tolerable if you're both capable and we're happy living a simple and modest life, and then to seek out those things that would seem to be going away from God. And that's more than just like a nightly thing. I mean, the fact that we're on a more rigid road to perfection just would amplify the degree of insanity behind that, right? I mean, I grew up, and my family did some of that stuff, and my wife comes from a humbler background than I do, and we just that has not been really a part of my marriage. In fact, most of the things that I have done of that sort were business related, but I had to do them because they were business related. And I mean, I've taken my wife out to nice restaurants for things, but I mean, I've never been to even those places that are like insane, or I think are insane. But you know me, I'm kind of frugal, so like a lot of things pass over to my insanity barrier that, oh, here we go, a lot of questions. Okay, Peter, I love you. That's a great number of questions. Let's go through these one at a time. I'm going to read them out loud. I wonder if there's a way I can maximize the chat window here. Here we go. Okay, common life will not manifest itself easily for you, Peter. You are going to be in the boat that I was in for the majority of my knighthood. The way you're going to have to try to envision the common life is by maintaining contact with knights via the phone, to attend retreats and other things in common as you can. And I would highly recommend making close friendships with other men of devotion uh, in either other associations or just men at your chapel, and inviting them to participate in aspects of your knighthood, such as the office, or you could have a book club, a spiritual book club, or things of that sort. So you can still get the benefit of some common association. The other thing, too, is that remember in our constitutions, it does say that we deal with other groups with similar ends to us. So attaching onto those other groups so that you have some spirit of camaraderie and you have a place to practice those virtues that are common to the common life can be a beneficial thing. It can just mean literally trying to make your own house with your wife and your children the common life too. When I was back in California and I was well by myself, my wife actually set a lot of the hours with me in common. And I was in a schola, and we would practice several times a week, and sometimes we'd also sing the office together. Is that the best thing I could say? Building wealth in the form of retirement savings and college savings, kids, is a completely acceptable use of your funds. Here's the way to look at it. As long as you are paying your tithe to the order and you are not refusing those requests for almsgiving that are proper to your state of life from other people, it is completely morally upright to save for your retirement and to save for your kids' college accounts. These are perfect things because they are not taking your money and spending them on superfluous pleasures. They are taking your money and planning for the future. On the one hand, and this is actually in the life of St. Bernard, he was very reluctant to ask for donations to continue to build on to Clairvaux, which had become very big. And eventually they said, quoted the scriptures, and one of his brothers quoted the scriptures and pointed out that you're a fool if you start building a tower without knowing if you'll have enough stone. You need to take donations. It's the same thing. We're both in IT. We both know that our business goes through cycles. There's outsourcing. Having an emergency fund or building wealth or even trying to enable yourself through savings or even the ownership of a business to be able to eventually obtain to a level of financial independence where one could live a modest life in order that they might more fully live out our life is an admirable one. So, the goal, your goal for savings for retirement should be to obtain to a circumstance where you could more fully live out the rule, but you still live a modest life. Our goal is not golden bodies on golden beaches and cruises all over the world forever, but a life of devotion, a life of regular prayer, the attendance of the sacraments, and helping our neighbor. And, desiring a modest income through stocks or real estate or whatever your retirement savings is a good thing. When St. Bernard speaks of abhorring the chase, is he referring to hunting for the sport of it, correct? Yes. Specifically, he was referring to, of course, the chase was a form of mounted horseback, but the fact he included falconry in that too. Um, I'll be direct with you. The Knights in Italy hunt. They love hunting. It's a big deal to them. We ate at my vows. They had hunted a wild boar that morning, so we could eat it that night. Do not make hunting an end in that you are going to. Hunting is a perfect example of a recreative activity that can take on a life of its own and then injure your knighthood. Hunting is, if you and your son or you want to go out hunting or it's a part of your life, that's fine. If you're going to do it and miss Mass on Sunday or miss Vespers on a Saturday or not go out on retreat or not do any of those things, it is not okay. But in terms of me, I've never been hunting at this point in my life. I might go if somebody invited me, or if it was just to teach my son about how to do it. But it's not something at this point I plan on picking up. And then Exodus 90, no, yeah, I mean, Exodus 90 is those types of cuts that I'm talking about. Exodus 90 is a pretty extreme program in that they're asking for a radical abandonment of many things. And then at the end of that, you should be able to, of course, withdraw from many of those things. I think that you've given up even more. That is one way of going about it. Um, as long as, it doesn't ever displace, I know there's sort of like a group thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You did Exodus 90, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I can put you in contact here with, our postulant, Chris. He's been through the program, but it might be an example. I personally, my opinion is that I think it depends on what type of a person you are. If you find strength from doing things with other people, I think it's a good program. If you're more one of those people that is a self-study, independent improvement guy, I would probably encourage you to take the Exodus 90 program and then make adjustments based on, like, because I mean, they don't watch sports, right? That's one of the things they give up is no sports.
That would be part of it in the sense that you're giving up lots of technologies.
Okay, so for example, I don't watch sports. That wouldn't be. I don't do TV. There's a lot of things that I already don't do. So like engaging in Exodus 90 for me it wouldn't necessarily give me that push. Maybe I need a push in other places though. So yes, I think Exodus 90 is a fine program. And in terms of living a common life, because you're doing it in a group of people, it could be a great place to benefit from aspects of the common life without actually living near a knight.
It was nice in the sense that it helped me figure out whether or not if I wanted to be a knight or not.
Well, see, you hear it there from the man himself. Okay. Any more questions, Will, brother? Chris?
For certain, like on hobbies and like excess, like spending to excess. So you mentioned like buying a firearm. Firearm is a typical thing in an American household. So for me, so you already know with like my swordsmanship and whatnot, how could that fit in? I mean, obviously, obviously it's not acceptable if it's getting in the way of my faith. Like if I ended up missing mass, or if I dropped $1,000 on a sword and I couldn't pay the tithe, obviously like that would be wrong. But at what point would it be acceptable? Or what are the thresholds? I guess is what I'm asking here.
This is like saying, how much should I pray?
Ah.
I mean, it is to some degree. The answer is without ceasing, and you should give without measure, and you should abstain completely. But then it's also the other answer is do as you can and not as you cannot. That was a St. Michael's Abbey, the Norbertines. They used to say that to me all the time when I was a little boy in their eyes. And and so forth. They used to say to me, "Do as you can." I forgot what saint that's from. Do as you can, not as you cannot. Sparing. I think we want to be. Okay, I'll give you maybe some guidance in my opinion. Do you know gun people? You probably met guitar people too, right?
Yeah.
They own like 20 guitars.
Mhm.
They play like 2 of them, but they own 20. The reason why they own 20 is because they either want to be a great guitarist, they may be, I don't know, but they feel like each time they buy a guitar, they become a better guitarist. And I think a lot of people, or maybe they get closer to that dream of being a rock star. I think a lot of people buy like 50 guns too, because what they're dying for is a chance to prove their courage, and it kind of alleviates the pain of not being able to prove their courage by buying a gun. St. Bernard said, "What the eye does not see, it cannot desire." And so when we find ourselves longing after things that are not absolutely necessary, we have to sit back and examine the frequency at which we're going to use the thing, our limits, needs, how long we're going to use it, and what the end we wish to obtain from it is. So, I have a barbecue. I have a modestly priced barbecue. I got it on sale. I cook outside during the summer so I don't eat at my house, although I do enjoy barbecuing very much. Um, I tried to buy one that I wouldn't shame myself. And I think that's the way you need to look at it, is that I am a poor knight of Christ. If I own this thing, will it make me ashamed of myself with my name? Is it in keeping? Now, I'll be direct with you at the other end of the spectrum. In Italy, the Grand Master has a Mercedes Benz. Okay, so I mean, this is not an area that we police each other on.
One thing, like another one where conscience will guide you on this one. I would assume so.
It does. Once again, I mean, I think the way you need to look at these things is, and there's a lot of writings I could direct you at. There's a book by, gosh, I don't want to say it's Thomas Dubé, Father Thomas. There's a book called Happy Are You Poor, if you're interested in the question of how laymen are to observe evangelical poverty. It's like 180 pages. It drills into your head these terms: sparing, sharing, and caring. Pretty much summed up the whole book, but he beats it to death. And I mean, notice it was very effective on me, and I read it like 12 years ago or something ridiculous. Robert Bellarmine, St. Alphonsus, and some of the other like Baroque, right, post-Trent authors talked about basically we're all born into a class. Like, you probably all here were born into the middle class in some spectrum of it. And that more or less it's always morally acceptable that a man maintain his class, and that, but anything he obtains or wanting to obtain above that is superfluous. And then that superfluity, he has to give generously of that in alms. Some say under sin, like Bellarmine, and others under like Alphonsus, and like the great Jesuit authors are like, if he's asked, or the support of the church in his superfluous income. And I think a good measure that I always used was, am I spending more money on this thing than I am in almsgiving or in generosity to the church or in doing good works? But at the same time, if you need something I mean, if I'm struggling to find an example. All right, there are some people who are salespeople and they pick up clients and they need a nice car. Or they drive Uber X, right? The premium Uber service. They need to own a nice car to drive the premium Uber service. Totally allowable for them to have like a really nice car because it's part of their livelihood, or it's expected at that state. Like, I mean, if you're work for a big law firm or something and you're expected to drive a fancy car, then you can. I'm a programmer, so people don't expect like anything of us in terms of that. I could show up in a beat up nothing. I could show up in my minivan, right? No one's my worn out 2006 minivan. But I think that's probably the best way to look at it.
Yeah.
Just remember, you're going to be judged on it before God. I mean, that's scary. I mean, that should make anybody circumspect about what we spend our money on. At the same time, there is a crazy end to that too, where, I mean, there was a little phase that I know somebody very well who went through where he was terrified of even like getting Taco Bell, and that he only wanted to eat the absolute cheapest food because he was afraid of what God, would do if he didn't observe that type of strictness. So, boy, I mean, I know your hobby's expensive, but but then again, like, I mean, I look at hobbies today, and I mean, they're releasing like a new VR thing. It's like $500, and
Yeah.
and like people who tune their cars spend thousands of dollars a year on that, and I mean, gourmands, if that's a hobby, I mean, I guess it kind of is. I mean, these people like drop hundreds of dollars on deals on the weekend. So is it really a big deal if you buy a $300 sword or something? I mean, that you actually use in tournaments? I mean, as long as I mean, that doesn't seem as excessive.
Yeah.
I mean, this is like $200 or $300 here. This habit I wear, but I wear it, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I think it's hard for us too because we're used to living in an economy of scale.
Yeah.
And it's not bad to watch. Like, I've bought hand painted icons before, and I employed somebody to do that, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It's just that we're so used to like being able to get really cheap stuff that now it seems wrong when we pay a tradesman like $30 an hour to make something that could last for 50 years. I don't know. I think it has to really come down to what is your income and what percent are you spending on it? Is it excessive? And is it something like out of the ordinary? But if you take up horseback riding, man, I would like want to slap you. Like, don't do that. Like, if you ever hear, I want to buy a horse. Now, if you own the farm and the horse can graze, you have a stable, fine. But I mean, just things like that. I think that's what you need to be on the guard. Just like, But yeah, just beware of hobbies. They become
like
people.
the hunting, like where it takes on a life of its own, and that, it gets in the way of other things.
Men need exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You've chosen a way to get particular exercise that involves a lot of skill, but you have to keep it in its place. And it's only when you allow it outside of its place, and you need to look to your spiritual director and you need to look to your novice master to help give you guidance on whether or not they think it's too much.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, how much do you spend? I mean, we could talk about that later, but.
Right.
But I mean, in a year, you're probably not even spending $1,000, right? Okay. I mean, so you're talking about a sum of money that works out to less than $20 a week. I mean, so I mean, people spend more on their fast food bill a week, or their whatever it is that people spend money on nowadays, like their hair treatments, or their nail salon visits. I don't know. Any more questions from you, Chris? That's directed to you too, Peter. I'll wait for a confirmation from you. You good? Well, I'm going to wait for you, Peter, on that, but I'm going to talk while that goes on. So our next conference is continuing the constitutions. The next one will be on the governance of the order. So like how the hierarchy works, how voting works. I thought the reason why I'm doing that one is because our elections, as you know, are in June. So I thought that it might, okay, thank you, Peter. I thought it might be good to.
It's June 15th?
Yeah, and please make yourself available that weekend, starting on Friday. as much as you can. So, do you get any time off at work at this stage in your employment or no?
Take some PTO, but like I'm also flexible in the sense that I could go into work early and get off at like 3 o'clock. So that way I wouldn't have to like either use sick time or use PTO or anything like that.
Okay. All right. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, one God. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady, Queen of the Militia,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, one God. Amen. Please remember to pray for our Grand Master. He celebrates his 40th anniversary as Grand Master of the Order this year. Thank you, and I look forward to our next session. God bless.